The first bullet shattered Iron Wolf's world before he could even process the horror sprawled before him. Running Bear's scalped corpse lay twisted in the dirt, blood pooling beneath what remained of his younger brother's skull, and the rifle crack echoed off the burning homestead walls like thunder from hell itself. Iron Wolf's heart screamed in agony, 30 years of shared memories of hunting together as boys, of fighting side by side against the crow, of the countless nights Running Bear had sat by his fire, telling stories to make the children laugh, now reduced to butchered meat left for the ravens. A second shot splintered the charred doorframe above his head. Iron Wolf rolled behind an overturned wagon, his mind fragmenting between grief and survival instinct. The shooting was deliberate, methodical. Someone wanted him pinned down, not dead. Yet, "Come out, Chief." The voice carried across the smoky wasteland with military precision. "I know you're there." Iron Wolf's weathered hands trembled as he gripped his rifle. Who knew he would come here? Who knew about Running Bear's secret refuge? The questions burned like acid in his throat, but a soft whimper from the collapsed porch drove all thoughts away. There, huddled against a charred fence post like a wounded animal, sat a small girl. Brown hair tangled with soot and blood storm-colored eyes, wide with terror that had aged her beyond her years. In her tiny fist, she clutched a bloodied eagle feather, the sacred symbol of their bloodline. Another shot forced Iron Wolf to duck as he crawled toward her. The child pulled back when he reached for her trauma, making her eyes dart like a cornered deer's. "Quiet, little one," he whispered, his voice thick with barely controlled rage. "Are you hurt?" "Ain't." She breathed in broken Lakota, the word hitting him like a physical blow. "Father?" Iron Wolf's heart clenched. This was Running Bear's daughter, the half-breed child born of forbidden love, carrying the sacred birthmark of their people, 3 crescent moons on her left shoulder, that marked her as chosen by the spirits. "What's your name?" "In Little Star," she whispered, then repeated it in their tongue. "We can't be Chistina." The thunder of approaching hooves shattered the moment. Many horses moving fast, coming from multiple directions. Iron Wolf realized with cold certainty that this was a trap, one that had been months in the making. "Can you run?" he asked urgently. She nodded, though her small body shook like aspen leaves in winter wind. As Iron Wolf lifted her onto his horse, he caught sight of words carved into the homestead's doorframe. Not cavalry markings, but a personal message that made his blood freeze. "CM. Your move, Chief. The girl is mine. CM. Major Caldwell." The scarred butcher who had been hunting his people for months, always one step ahead, always knowing their movements before they made them. But carved into the wood was something else, a symbol that made Iron Wolf's world tilt on its axis. The mark of the Whispering Wind Society. The secret warrior lodge that only the most trusted members of the tribe could join. Someone from within his own people had guided Caldwell here. As they rode toward the canyon maze, Little Star's small voice cut through the thunder of pursuit. "Uncle the bad man, with the broken face, he said he'd come back for me. He said I belong to him now, because of the papers." "What papers, little one?" "The ones Mama hid. The ones that make me rich." Her voice cracked with exhaustion and fear. "He killed Papa trying to find them. But I know where they are." Iron Wolf's mind reeled. Running Bear hadn't just fallen in love with any white woman, he'd fallen in love with money. Enough money to make this frightened child a target for every greedy man in the territory. Behind them, dust clouds marked the approach of what looked like an entire cavalry company. But Iron Wolf's trained eye caught something that chilled him to the bone. Some of the riders were flying Lakota war banners alongside the blue guidons of the U.S. Army. The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. Someone hadn't just given away Running Bear's location, they'd convinced other warriors to ride with the cavalry against their own people. The war for Little Star's life was about to become a war for the soul of the Lakota nation. As they plunged into the labyrinth of red rock and shadow, Iron Wolf couldn't shake the feeling that they were riding not towards safety, but toward a reckoning that had been inevitable from the moment Running Bear had chosen love over tribal law. The Lakota village crouched in the valley like a creature in pain, its sacred circle of teepees unable to hide the gaunt faces and hollow eyes of a people slowly starving. Iron Wolf rode through the camp with Little Star clinging to his back, and the weight of desperate gazes followed them like physical things. Another mouth to feed. Muttered Spotted Elk, his ancient voice, carrying the bitterness of watching his own grandchildren grow thin. While our warriors search empty streams for fish that fled with the buffalo. She bears the mark of the chosen, observed Singing Crow, her fingers never pausing in their work on a beaded medicine bag. The old woman's eyes held secrets that made Iron Wolf uneasy, though he couldn't name why. The spirits have sent her to us in our darkest hour. The spirits sent us nothing but curses. Thunderhawk's voice cut through the growing murmur like a blade. Iron Wolf's war chief stepped forward, his massive frame blocking their path, but his eyes held calculation rather than simple anger. That's Running Bear's half-breed spawn. What price will we pay for harboring her? Iron Wolf dismounted slowly, his hand never leaving his rifle. She's family. Family. Thunderhawk laughed, but it was the sound of grinding stone. Running Bear abandoned us for a white woman's bed. Now cavalry companies circle us like wolves, and you bring his bastard child to our fire. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a death pyre. Around them, warriors gathered with faces hardened by hunger and desperation. Iron Wolf could feel the tribe's unity fracturing each man, weighing his family's survival against abstract notions of honor. Little Star slipped down from the horse, staying close to Iron Wolf's leg. Her storm-colored eyes swept the hostile faces with intelligence that seemed far too old for her years. "I don't want to be a burden," she said in careful Lakota, her young voice carrying clearly in the tense silence. "But the bad man will come for me whether I'm here or not. At least this way you can choose how to fight him." "Fight him?" Thunderhawk's scarred face twisted with dark amusement. "Child Major Caldwell has 2 companies of cavalry. We have 30 warriors and barely enough ammunition for 1 battle." "Then don't fight him like a warrior." Little Star replied, her voice gaining strength. "Fight him like a lawyer." The unexpected response sent a ripple of confusion through the gathered men. Iron Wolf stared at the child, seeing something in her eyes that reminded him powerfully of Running Bear's gift for thinking several moves ahead. "What do you mean?" he asked quietly. Little Star reached into her small pouch and pulled out a handful of Paper's legal documents that had somehow survived the burning of the homestead. Mama was Elizabeth Morrison. She owned things, important things, things worth more money than some men see in their whole lives. She spread the papers on the ground, and Iron Wolf felt his world shift as he read names he recognized from newspaper headlines. Railroad companies, mining concerns, land grants that stretched across 3 territories. "How much?" Thunderhawk demanded, his warrior's mind already calculating the strategic implications. $30 million, Little Star said simply. "Maybe more. Mama bought this whole valley from the government before she married Papa. It's legally mine now." The silence that followed was so complete that Iron Wolf could hear the wind whispering through the canyon walls. $30 million. Enough to buy safety for every Native American tribe between here and the Pacific Ocean, if she lives to claim it. Singing Crow said softly, her ancient eyes studying the papers with uncomfortable intensity. "The white man's law only protects the white man's children. In their law, I'm white." Little Star replied with matter-of-fact precision. "Elizabeth Morrison's daughter first, Running Bear's daughter second. My claim would stand up in any court." Thunderhawk's expression had changed completely. The child he'd been ready to sacrifice had just offered them something more valuable than gold, a legal foundation for their people's future that didn't depend on the mercy of their enemies. But Caldwell won't care about legal claims. He said, his voice thoughtful rather than dismissive. He'll kill you and forge documents saying you died in an Indian raid. That's why we need to be smarter than him, Little Star replied. Papa taught me that the best battles are won before the fighting starts. Iron Wolf studied the child's face, seeing the intelligence burning there like a sacred fire. Running Bear had chosen his daughter's education, carefully preparing her for a world where survival depended on wit rather than strength. Tell us what you know, he commanded. Little Star closed her eyes, as if accessing memories too painful to revisit. Caldwell has 60 men, but only 15 are real soldiers. The rest are hired guns from the railroad companies. They're not loyal to him, they're loyal to their pay. And the cavalry officers. Most don't know about the money. Caldwell told them I was kidnapped by hostile Indians. If they learned the truth... She opened her eyes, and Iron Wolf saw steel in their depths. They might choose justice over orders. Thunderhawk leaned forward, his scarred face intent. How do we expose him? We make him desperate enough to make mistakes. Little Star's voice carried the quiet confidence of someone who had thought this through. Caldwell needs my body and the legal documents to claim the inheritance. If he can't get both, he gets nothing. The war chief studied her with new respect. You're talking about using yourself as bait. I'm talking about using his greed against him. Papa always said that a man's greatest strength could become his greatest weakness if you knew how to turn it. Iron Wolf felt a surge of pride mixed with terror. This 8-year-old girl was thinking like a military strategist, but she was also talking about risking her life in a game where the slightest mistake would mean death. It's too dangerous, he said firmly. Everything's dangerous now. Little Star replied with the wisdom of someone who had already lost everything once. But at least this way, we choose our own risks. As the tribal council debated late into the night, Iron Wolf couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. Caldwell's confidence, the presence of Lakota warriors riding with the cavalry, the precision of the trap at the homestead, it all pointed to inside knowledge that went deeper than simple military intelligence. Someone in the tribe was feeding information to their enemies. Someone who knew their movements, their weaknesses, their deepest secrets. And until they identified the traitor, every plan they made would be compromised from the start. The sacred fire burned low as the council reached its decision. They would stand with Little Star, but on their own terms. If Caldwell wanted the child, he would have to face the entire tribe. If he wanted a war, they would give him one he'd never forget. But as the warriors dispersed to prepare their defenses, Iron Wolf noticed Singing Crow lingering by the dying flames, her weathered hands working at something in her lap. When she looked up and met his eyes, her expression held a sorrow so deep it seemed to echo from the spirit world itself. The ancestors weep for what must come, she whispered. But sometimes the price of survival is higher than the price of death. Iron Wolf felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The old woman's words carried the weight of prophecy, and in his experience, Singing Crow's prophecies always came true. The attack came with the first light of dawn, not as a cavalry charge, but as a siege that spoke of careful planning and intimate knowledge of the village's defenses. Caldwell's forces had positioned themselves on the surrounding ridges during the night, turning the valley into a natural prison. Iron Wolf crouched behind a hastily constructed barricade of overturned wagons and grain sacks. Little Star pressed close beside him. The child had insisted on staying near the front lines, arguing that she could identify approaching riders and determine friend from foe. There, she whispered, pointing to a group of horsemen approaching under a white flag. I know the one in front, Broken Arrow. He was captured at Crow Creek 3 months ago. Iron Wolf studied the approaching delegation through his rifle scope. Broken Arrow rode with the rigid posture of a man under extreme stress, his war paint fresh, but his eyes hollow with something that might have been shame. He's not here by choice, Thunderhawk observed, moving up beside them. Look at his hands, they're shaking. Hostages, Iron Wolf realized with cold certainty. Caldwell's holding his family. The parley that followed was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Caldwell himself remained hidden on the ridge, speaking through Broken Arrow with the clinical precision of a man who had reduced human suffering to a mathematical equation. Chief Iron Wolf. Broken Arrow's voice carried clearly across the valley, though his words came in the stilted rhythm of someone repeating a memorized speech. Major Caldwell offers terms for the surrender of the Morrison girl. What terms? Iron Wolf called back, though he already knew the answer would be worthless. Safe passage for the tribe to the reservation at Pine Ridge. Food and medical supplies for the winter. No pursuit or retaliation for past actions. The offer sounded generous to anyone who didn't understand Caldwell's true nature. But Iron Wolf had seen Pine Ridge a desolate wasteland, where proud warriors were reduced to begging for government handouts while their children slowly starved. And if we refuse, Broken Arrow's voice cracked slightly. Then he will take the girl by force and leave no survivors to tell the story. Little Star stepped forward, her small figure somehow commanding attention despite her size. Tell Major Caldwell that I have a counteroffer. Little Star, no Iron Wolf warned, but she was already speaking. I'll meet him in single combat. If he wins, he gets what he wants. If I win, he withdraws his forces and never troubles our people again. The challenge sent a wave of shock through both sides. A child challenging a grown man to single combat was either the height of courage or the depth of madness. The Major says you're not worth his personal attention. Broken Arrow replied after a long pause. But he's willing to let you prove your worth against a champion of his choosing. Who? Singing Crow's son, Grey Wolf. The name hit Iron Wolf like a physical blow. Grey Wolf, the young warrior who had spoken in favor of protecting Little Star. The man who had seemed like one of their most loyal supporters. Impossible. Thunderhawk snarled. Grey Wolf is here in the village. But even as he spoke, they could see the truth in Broken Arrow's eyes. Grey Wolf wasn't in the village, hadn't been for hours. He was riding with Caldwell's forces, his loyalty bought with threats against his mother. Singing Crow, Iron Wolf called to the old woman, who had been standing frozen since Grey Wolf's name was spoken. Where is your son? The medicine woman's face had gone pale as winter snow. He left before dawn. Said he was checking the southern approaches. He's been feeding information to Caldwell. Thunderhawk said, his voice heavy with disgust. How long has this been going on? Since they captured him at Crow Creek. Singing Crow whispered, her voice barely audible. They told him they would kill me if he didn't cooperate. He thought he was protecting me, but he was only protecting their lies. The revelation shattered the last of the tribe's unity. Warriors who had been ready to die for their people suddenly found themselves questioning everything they believed. If Grey Wolf could be turned, who else might be compromised? The challenge stands. Little Star said quietly, her voice cutting through the chaos of accusations and fears. I'll fight Grey Wolf, but I choose the terms. What terms? Iron Wolf asked, though he dreaded the answer. Traditional combat. The sacred ledge above the canyon. No weapons except what the spirits provide. Victory goes to whoever survives. The sacred ledge was a narrow outcropping of rock that jutted out over a 100-foot drop to the canyon floor. It was barely wide enough for two people, with no room for mistakes and no chance for retreat. The Lakota had used it for vision quests and spiritual trials, but never for combat. You'll die, Thunderhawk said bluntly. Maybe. But if I win cleanly. No one can say I cheated or had unfair advantages. Little Star's storm-colored eyes held absolute determination. And if I die fighting for my people. That's more than most children get to choose. Iron Wolf felt his heart breaking. This child who had become so precious to him was calmly discussing her own death as if it were a simple tactical decision. But he also recognized the wisdom in her strategy. By choosing traditional combat, she was making this about more than just personal survival. She was making it about honor, about the old ways, about everything the Lakota people held sacred. "I'll be your second," he said quietly. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." The preparations for the ritual combat took most of the morning. Both sides withdrew to neutral positions while the sacred ledge was prepared according to ancient custom. Eagle feathers were scattered around the fighting area, sage was burned to purify the space, and offerings were made to the spirits who would judge the outcome. Little Star spent the time in meditation, her small form motionless as she sat beside the sacred fire. She had removed all her jewelry, except for one item, a small beaded pouch that had belonged to her father. Inside, Iron Wolf knew were the legal documents that made her so valuable to Caldwell. As the sun reached its zenith, the combatants made their way to the sacred ledge. Gray Wolf approached from the east, his face a mask of misery and determination. He was twice Little Star's size and had been trained in warfare since childhood. But his eyes held the hollow look of a man who had already lost everything that mattered. "I'm sorry," he whispered to Little Star as they faced each other on the narrow ledge. "I never wanted this." "I know," she replied softly. "But we all have to choose what we're willing to die for." The combat that followed was unlike anything Iron Wolf had ever witnessed. Gray Wolf's advantage in size and strength was neutralized by the precarious footing and Little Star's superior agility. She moved like water around his attacks, using the terrain to her advantage while he struggled to find stable ground. But the real battle was psychological. Gray Wolf was fighting to save his mother, but he was also fighting against a child who represented everything he had betrayed. Every strike he attempted was slowed by guilt. Every advantage he gained was undermined by the knowledge that victory would destroy what remained of his honor. Little Star, on the other hand, fought with the focused intensity of someone who had already accepted death. She wasn't trying to kill Gray Wolf. She was trying to outlast him, to force him to make the choice between his mother's life and his own soul. The end came suddenly. Gray Wolf, exhausted by the emotional and physical strain, stumbled as he tried to corner Little Star against the cliff face. She slipped aside, and his momentum carried him to the very edge of the precipice. For a heart-stopping moment, he teetered on the brink, his arms windmilling frantically as he tried to regain his balance. Little Star could have pushed him, then one small shove would have sent him tumbling to his death. Instead, she grabbed his arm and pulled him back to safety. "Why?" Gray Wolf gasped, staring at her in amazement. "Because you're not the enemy," Little Star replied simply. "You're just another victim." The mercy she showed him was her victory. Gray Wolf collapsed to his knees, overcome by the weight of what he had done and the grace he had been shown. In that moment, the entire valley could see that this child possessed something that transcended mere courage. She possessed wisdom. But Caldwell wasn't interested in wisdom. His rifle shot echoed across the canyon, and Gray Wolf jerked backward, blood blooming across his chest as he fell. "Enough games," the Major's voice roared from the ridge. "The girl comes with me now, or I start killing everyone in sight." The sniper's bullet had come from an impossible angle, revealing that Caldwell had positioned marksmen throughout the canyon walls. The sacred combat had been nothing more than a distraction while he set up his final trap. Iron Wolf raised his rifle, but he was too far away to make an effective shot. Little Star stood alone on the sacred ledge, exposed and defenseless, while enemy weapons drew beads on her small form. That's when Singing Crow made her choice. The old woman stepped out from behind the rocks, where she had been watching the combat, her weathered hands raised in surrender. "Major Caldwell, I have something you want more than the child. What could you possibly have that interests me?" Caldwell's voice carried amused contempt. "The location of the real documents," Singing Crow called back. "The ones Elizabeth Morrison hid. The ones that prove the child's inheritance beyond any doubt." Little Star's eyes went wide with shock. The papers in her pouch were copies, clever forgeries that Running Bear had prepared in case they were discovered. The real documents were hidden somewhere else, and only Singing Crow knew where. "Grandmother, no," Little Star whispered. But the old woman was already climbing toward the ridge, her movement slow but determined. "I've lived long enough to see my son betray his people and die for his betrayal. Let me at least ensure his death serves some purpose." Iron Wolf watched in horror as Singing Crow approached Caldwell's position. The old woman had been part of the conspiracy from the beginning, forced to cooperate by threats against her son. But now, she was offering herself as the ultimate sacrifice to save the child she had helped to doom. "The documents are hidden in the sacred cave behind the waterfall," she called out as she reached the ridge. "But you'll never find them without me to guide you." Caldwell appeared at the cliff edge, his scarred face twisted with greed and suspicion. "Why should I trust you?" "Because I'm the one who told you about the homestead." Singing Crow replied, her voice carrying clearly in the canyon's acoustics. "I'm the one who guided you to Running Bear. I'm the one who betrayed my own people to save my son." The admission sent shockwaves through the watching Lakota. Their most revered medicine woman, the keeper of their sacred traditions, had been the traitor all along. "And now your son is dead," Caldwell observed coldly. "What do you have left to live for?" Singing Crow's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. "Nothing. Which is why you can trust me to keep my word." The old woman reached into her medicine bag and pulled out a small object that gleamed in the afternoon sun. A metal cylinder, no larger than her thumb, with a short fuse protruding from one end. "I've been saving this for the right moment," she said, her voice carrying the calm certainty of absolute purpose. "A gift from the cavalry supply train we raided last month." Caldwell's eyes went wide with understanding. "You crazy old witch." The explosion shattered the afternoon air, sending rocks and debris cascading into the canyon. Singing Crow and Caldwell disappeared in a cloud of smoke and dust, their bodies tumbling down the cliff face to the rocks below. In the sudden silence that followed, Iron Wolf could hear only the sound of his own heartbeat and Little Star's ragged breathing. The old woman's final sacrifice had eliminated their primary enemy, but it had also left them without the knowledge they needed to find the real documents. "Did she tell you?" He called to Little Star, praying that Singing Crow had passed on the secret before her death. Little Star nodded, her storm-colored eyes bright with tears. "She whispered it to me during the ritual preparation. The documents are in the place where eagles nest, where the water sings, where the ancient ones carved their dreams in stone." Iron Wolf felt his heart lift. He knew that place, the sacred cave system behind the great waterfall, where generations of Lakota had gone to seek visions and guidance from the spirits. The documents were hidden in the most sacred place their people knew. But even as relief flooded through him, he realized that their troubles were far from over. Caldwell was dead, but his forces were still out there, still armed and dangerous. And without their leader's restraining influence, they might be even more unpredictable than before. The war for Little Star's life had entered its final phase, and Iron Wolf had the sinking feeling that the worst was yet to come. The retreat from the sacred ledge became a nightmare of constant harassment and dwindling supplies. Caldwell's leaderless forces had scattered into smaller groups, but instead of fleeing, they had become a pack of wolves, harrying the Lakota survivors through the canyon maze. Iron Wolf led the battered tribe through passages carved by ancient waters, every step taking them deeper into territory that offered both sanctuary and the possibility of becoming their tomb. Little Star rode beside him, her small form swaying with exhaustion. But her eyes remained alert for the signs her father had taught her to read. "Water ahead," she whispered, pointing to a subtle change in the rock formations. "Maybe half a mile." Thunderhawk, bloodied but still fighting, brought up the rear guard with a handful of warriors. "How many following us?" 15, maybe 20, came the reply. "They're not soldiers anymore, just bounty hunters." Caldwell must have promised them gold for the girl's body. The prospect of easy money had transformed the remaining cavalry into something more dangerous than disciplined soldiers. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain from Little Star's death. As they reached the hidden waterfall, Iron Wolf felt a surge of hope. The sacred cave system stretched for miles behind the cascading water with passages that led to dozens of different exits. If they could find the documents Elizabeth Morrison had hidden, they might be able to escape with proof of Little Star's inheritance. But as they approached the cave entrance, Thunderhawk's sharp eyes caught something that made his blood run cold. "Footprints," he said grimly. "Recent ones. Someone's been here ahead of us." Iron Wolf studied the tracks, his tracker's instincts, reading the story written in mud and stone. 2 sets of prints, one from cavalry boots, one from moccasins. The cavalry prints were deep, suggesting a heavily armed man. The moccasin prints were lighter, but they showed the gait of someone moving with purpose rather than caution. "Broken Arrow," Little Star said quietly. "He's still alive." "Mar, and working with someone from Caldwell's forces," Thunderhawk added. "They've had hours to prepare whatever trap they're setting." Iron Wolf felt the weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. They could retreat, but their pursuers would eventually corner them in the canyon. They could try to find another route to the cave, but that would give their enemies more time to prepare. Or they could go forward knowing they were walking into an ambush. "We go in," he decided, "but carefully, and we assume nothing." The cave entrance was hidden behind the waterfall's curtain of mist and spray. Iron Wolf led the way, his rifle ready, while Little Star stayed close behind him. The rest of the tribe took defensive positions outside, ready to cover their retreat if necessary. The sacred cave was exactly as Iron Wolf remembered from his youth, a vast chamber filled with ancient pictographs and the accumulated wisdom of generations. But now it felt different, contaminated by the presence of men who had no respect for its sanctity. "Over here," Little Star whispered, pointing to a section of wall where the cave paintings told the story of a great eagle carrying messages between the world of the living and the world of the spirits. Her small hands found the hidden mechanism. Her mother had used a loose stone that could be rotated to reveal a cavity behind it. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather, were the documents that could change the fate of every Native American in the territory. "Got them." She breathed, her voice tight with relief. That's when Broken Arrow stepped out of the shadows, his rifle trained on Iron Wolf's chest. Behind him came a cavalry sergeant, his uniform torn and stained with blood from the canyon fighting. "Easy, Chief." The sergeant said, his voice carrying the exhaustion of a man who had been pushed beyond his limits. "We're not here to fight. We're here to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Iron Wolf asked, though he kept his rifle ready. "The kind where everybody gets what they want. The girl gets to live. You get to keep your people safe. And we get enough gold to disappear somewhere the army can't find us." Broken Arrow's face was a mask of shame and desperation. "My family is still hostage. If I don't bring back proof of the girl's death, they'll kill my wife and children." The situation was even more complex than Iron Wolf had realized. These men weren't just mercenaries, they were victims of Caldwell's corruption, trapped in a web of threats and impossible loyalties. "What do you propose?" Little Star asked, stepping forward despite Iron Wolf's warning gesture. "We fake your death," the sergeant replied. "Make it look like you died in a cave-in. I take some of your blood back to the remaining cavalry, tell them you were crushed by falling rocks. Broken Arrow tells his handlers that you're dead, and they release his family. And then you disappear. Use your inheritance to buy a new identity, start over somewhere safe. The heat dies down, and everybody goes their separate ways." It was a reasonable plan, but Iron Wolf could see the flaws in it. "What about the documents, the legal claim to the inheritance?" "That's where it gets complicated," the sergeant admitted. "The inheritance has to be claimed by Elizabeth Morrison's daughter. If Little Star Morrison is officially dead, then the money goes to the next of kin. Which is who? Caldwell's estate. He was Elizabeth's only living relative. Iron Wolf felt the trap closing around them. Even in death, Caldwell had found a way to steal Little Star's inheritance. Unless they could find another solution, the child would have to choose between her life and her legacy. There's another way, Little Star said quietly. A way that gives everyone what they need. I'm listening, the sergeant replied. We don't fake my death. We fake my identity. I become someone else, a Lakota girl who was adopted by the tribe after her white parents died. Little Star Morrison dies in a cave-in, but Wakanpai Sistina lives on as a member of the tribe. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. By legally changing her identity, Little Star could escape the inheritance trap while still remaining with her people. The money would go to Caldwell's estate, but she would be alive and free. But you'd be giving up $30 million, Iron Wolf protested. What good is money if you're dead? Little Star replied with the wisdom of someone who had learned the true value of things. Besides, the land grants are separate from the money. The valley still belongs to me under tribal law, even if I can't claim it under white man's law. Broken Arrow looked uncertain. My handlers will want proof. They'll want to see a body. But then we'll give them one, Thunderhawk said, appearing at the cave entrance. There are fresh graves from the canyon fighting. We'll dress one of the cavalry dead in the girl's clothes, crush the face beyond recognition, and let nature take its course. The plan was grisly, but practical. By the time anyone could examine the body closely enough to determine its true identity, the deception would be irrelevant. It could work, the sergeant admitted. But we'd need to move fast. The other bounty hunters are closing in, and they won't be interested in making deals. As they prepared to implement their desperate scheme, Iron Wolf couldn't help but admire Little Star's courage and intelligence. She was giving up the largest fortune in the territory to save her people. And she was doing it with the calm certainty of someone who understood that some things were more valuable than gold. But even as they worked to stage her death, he knew that their troubles were far from over. The bounty hunters would keep coming, drawn by the promise of easy money. And somewhere in the halls of power, other men were already plotting to claim the inheritance that Caldwell had died trying to steal. The war for Little Star's life was about to become a war for her soul. And Iron Wolf prayed to the ancestors that they would find the strength to win both battles. The deception worked better than anyone had dared hope. Within hours of the staged cave-in word spread through the canyon that Little Star Morrison had died in a tragic accident. The remaining bounty hunters, deprived of their prize, began to drift away toward easier prey. But Iron Wolf knew their respite was temporary. Sooner or later, someone would investigate the death more closely, and when they did, the truth would come out. They needed to be far away when that happened. Where can we go? Thunderhawk asked as they prepared to abandon the sacred cave. Every reservation is watched. Every trail is known to the cavalry. North Little Star replied, studying the maps her father had left her. Papa showed me a place where the old treaties still hold, where the government promised the Lakota could live forever. Those treaties are worthless paper, Thunderhawk said bitterly. The government breaks them whenever it's convenient. But not all of them, Little Star insisted. There's one treaty that's different. One that even the government can't break without admitting they've been lying for decades. She spread out a document that Iron Wolf recognized as one of the original papers from the homestead. It was a land grant deed, but not for the valley they had been fighting over. This was for territory much farther north in the heart of the Lakota sacred lands. Your mother bought this too, he asked. Not bought, inherited. From her grandmother, who married a Lakota chief in 1825. The marriage was legal under both white and Indian law, which means the land grants are valid under both systems. Iron Wolf felt his heart leap. If Little Star was right, they were looking at something unprecedented territory that belonged to the Lakota, not as a gift from the government, but as a legal inheritance that predated most of the treaties that had been used to steal their land. How much territory? Thunderhawk asked. 50,000 acres. Enough for the entire tribe to live on with room to grow. Little Star's eyes shone with excitement. It's not just land, Uncle. It's sovereignty. A place where we can govern ourselves according to our own laws. Thunderhawk studied the documents with growing amazement. But how do we get there? The Army patrols every major trail and winter's coming fast, the same way our ancestors did. Little Star replied. Through the sacred paths that the spirits showed them. Papa mapped them all routes that follow the old migration patterns, places where the buffalo used to run. Iron Wolf felt a chill of recognition. The paths she was describing were legendary, among the Lakota routes that had been used for centuries, but were now considered too dangerous for modern travel. They wound through wilderness areas where a single mistake could mean death for everyone. Those trails haven't been used in decades, he said carefully. We don't even know if they're still passable. They are, Little Star said with quiet certainty. I've seen them in my dreams. The eagles showed me the way. The statement sent a ripple of unease through the listening warriors. Among the Lakota dreams were not just fantasies. They were messages from the spirit world, guidance from the ancestors. But they were also dangerous to follow without proper interpretation. What kind of dreams? Singing Crow would have asked if she were still alive to guide them. Instead, it was Thunderhawk who voiced the question that everyone was thinking. Little Star closed her eyes as if accessing memories that existed beyond the physical world. I see a great eagle carrying a message across the sky. Below, the people follow a trail of stars through darkness and cold. At the end of the journey, there's a valley where the buffalo return, where the children laugh again. Vision dreams, Iron Wolf whispered. The kind that come to those chosen by the spirits. The possibility that Little Star was experiencing true prophetic visions changed everything. If the spirits were indeed guiding her, then following her lead might be their only hope of survival. But if she was simply a traumatized child creating fantasies to cope with loss, then trusting her visions could lead them all to destruction. We follow the dreams, he decided, but we also prepare for the worst. The journey north began 3 days later with the tribe traveling in small groups to avoid detection. Iron Wolf led the main party, while Thunderhawk commanded the rear guard that would cover their retreat if they were discovered. Little Star rode at the front of the column, her storm-colored eyes scanning the landscape for the signs her visions had shown her. She seemed to age years in a matter of days, the weight of responsibility transforming her from child to leader in ways that were both inspiring and heartbreaking. There, she said on the second day, pointing to a barely visible gap in the canyon wall. The path of the running deer. It leads to the high country where the snow spirits rest. Iron Wolf studied the route she indicated. To his experienced eyes, it looked like suicide. A narrow trail that climbed through avalanche-prone terrain toward passes that would be blocked by snow within weeks. Are you certain? He asked. The eagles are certain, Little Star replied. They've been scouting ahead for us. As if summoned by her words, a golden eagle appeared overhead, circling 3 times before flying toward the gap she had indicated. The bird's cry echoed off the canyon walls like a signal, and Iron Wolf felt the hair on his neck stand up. The spirits have spoken, he said quietly. We follow the eagle's path. The climb into the high country tested every member of the tribe to their limits. The trail was treacherous, with loose rock that could trigger avalanches and drops that offered no hope of survival for anyone who fell. But Little Star's guidance proved uncannily accurate. She seemed to know exactly where the safe paths lay, where water could be found, where shelter could be constructed for the night. On the 4th day, disaster struck. A sudden snowstorm swept down from the peaks, turning the trail into a death trap of ice and blinding wind. The tribe was caught in the open with no shelter and no way to retreat. Warriors who had survived countless battles began to succumb to the cold, their bodies failing them in the face of nature's assault. "We can't go on," Thunderhawk shouted over the howling wind. "We'll all die up here." But Little Star pressed forward her small form, somehow finding strength that the larger warriors lacked. "Not far now," she called back. "The cave of the Ancient Ones is just ahead." Iron Wolf couldn't see any cave, couldn't see anything but swirling snow and the vague shapes of his people struggling through the storm. But he followed Little Star's lead, trusting in her visions, even as his own strength began to fail. The cave appeared out of the storm like a miracle. A vast cavern carved into the mountainside, large enough to shelter the entire tribe and their animals. Inside they found evidence of previous occupants, ancient fire rings, pictographs on the walls, and stores of dried food that had been preserved by the mountain cold. "This is a sacred place," Little Star said as they made camp inside the cavern. "A place where our ancestors came to speak with the spirits during the great migrations." Iron Wolf studied the cave paintings, recognizing the symbols that told the story of the Lakota people's journey from the eastern woodlands to the Great Plains. But there were newer additions to the ancient art images that seemed to depict their own recent struggles. "Look at this," Thunderhawk said, pointing to a section of wall near the cave entrance. "These paintings, they show our journey. They show the battles we've fought." Iron Wolf felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. The images on the wall depicted scenes from their recent past with impossible accuracy. The burning homestead, the battle at the sacred ledge, even Little Star's combat with Grey Wolf. "Someone's been here recently," he said. "Someone who knew what we were going through." "No," Little Star said quietly. "These paintings are old, maybe centuries old. The ancestors painted them because they could see the future as well as the past. The possibility that they were following a path laid out by prophetic visions from centuries past was both thrilling and terrifying. If Little Star was right then their journey had been predetermined by forces beyond human understanding. But if she was wrong, they were trusting their lives to the fantasies of a traumatized child. "The storm will pass by morning," Little Star said with the certainty of someone who had seen beyond the present moment. "And when it does, we'll be able to see our destination." She was right. The storm broke with the dawn, revealing a landscape of breathtaking beauty and terrible danger. Below them lay a vast valley, green and fertile despite the snow-capped peaks that surrounded it. But between their cave and the valley floor stretched miles of treacherous terrain that would test their skills and courage to the limit. "The Promised Land," Thunderhawk said with awe. "It's real." "It's real," Little Star confirmed. "And it's ours by right of inheritance and prophecy. But we still have to reach it." The descent into the valley took 2 more days of careful navigation through terrain that seemed designed to kill the unwary. But Little Star's guidance continued to prove accurate, leading them around hidden crevasses and unstable slopes that would have claimed lives. When they finally reached the valley floor, Iron Wolf felt a surge of emotion that brought tears to his eyes. This was what they had been fighting for, not just survival, but the chance to build something lasting. A place where their children could grow up free, where their traditions could flourish, where the sacred ways could be preserved for future generations. "We made it," he said, hardly believing it himself. "No, we made it," Little Star agreed. "But now the real work begins." As the tribe began to establish their new settlement, Iron Wolf reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A frightened child had become a visionary leader, guiding them through dangers that would have claimed lesser people. The orphaned daughter of a man accused of betrayal had become the salvation of her people. But even as they celebrated their arrival in the Promised Land, Iron Wolf knew that their struggles were far from over. The outside world would eventually discover their sanctuary, and when it did, they would face new challenges that would test everything they had learned about courage, wisdom, and the power of hope. The eagle feather that Little Star still carried had indeed flown where the wind willed it, carrying them to a place where dreams could become reality. And as the first fires were lit in their new home, Iron Wolf offered a prayer of gratitude to the ancestors who had guided their path and to the child who had shown them the way. 5 years passed in the hidden valley, years of growth and healing that transformed the surviving Lakota from desperate refugees into a thriving community. Little Star, now 13, and showing the first signs of the woman she would become, had proven herself to be as gifted a leader as she was a visionary. Under her guidance, then the tribe had built not just a settlement, but a new way of life that honored the old traditions as well embracing necessary changes. They had established farms that provided food security workshops, that created goods for trade, and schools that taught both Lakota wisdom and the practical skills needed to survive in a changing world. Iron Wolf watched her with pride as she mediated a dispute between two families over water rights, her young voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned respect through deed rather than birth. She had grown tall and strong, her storm-colored eyes now reflecting the wisdom of someone who had seen the worst of humanity and chosen to respond with compassion rather than hatred. "The traders from Fort Benton are here," Thunderhawk announced, approaching the council lodge where Little Star was holding court. "They want to negotiate for our winter crafts." "What do they offer?" she asked, never looking up from the ledger where she was recording the tribe's harvest yields. "The usual. Guns, ammunition, manufactured goods. But they're also offering something new: legal papers. Documents that would give us official territorial status." Little Star finally looked up, her expression thoughtful. "What kind of status?" "Incorporated territory. Self-governing, but still under federal protection. It would make us legal in the eyes of Washington, but it would also mean accepting oversight from territorial officials." The offer represented everything they had been working toward: legal recognition that would protect their community from the kind of violence they had experienced 5 years ago. But it also meant giving up the complete independence they had enjoyed in their hidden valley. "What's the catch?" Iron Wolf asked, his years of experience making him suspicious of any offer that seemed too good to be true. "The traders won't say, but they're insisting on meeting with the Morrison girl specifically. They say they have information about her inheritance that could change everything." Little Star's face went pale. She had been legally dead for 5 years, her inheritance claimed by Caldwell's estate and distributed among his creditors. The emergence of traders who knew her true identity could only mean one thing: someone had discovered the deception. "How much do they know?" she asked quietly. "Enough to be dangerous," Thunderhawk replied. "They know you're alive, they know about the inheritance, and they know about this valley. The question is what they plan to do with that information." Iron Wolf felt the old familiar weight of impossible choices settling on his shoulders. They could refuse to meet with the traders, but that would only delay the inevitable. They could try to silence them, but that would make the tribe no better than the men they had been fleeing. Or they could face the situation head-on and hope that 5 years of growth and success had given them the strength to survive whatever was coming. "We meet with them," Little Star decided. "But on our terms, in our territory, with our people watching. If they want to threaten us, they'll have to do it in the open." The meeting took place in the council lodge with representatives from every family in the tribe present as witnesses. The traders were led by a well-dressed man in his 40s, who introduced himself as Marcus Webb, legal representative for the Morrison Railroad Trust. "Miss Morrison," he said, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. "Or should I say, Miss Wicampi Sistina, you've been very clever these past 5 years, but not quite clever enough." "What do you want?" Little Star asked, her voice steady despite the danger she could sense in every word. What I want is to correct a legal error that has cost my clients millions of dollars. You see, when Major Caldwell died, his estate claimed your inheritance on the grounds that you had died intestate. But you didn't die, did you? Which means the inheritance was fraudulently claimed. Webb pulled out a thick folder of legal documents, spreading them across the counsel table like a gambler revealing a winning hand. I represent a consortium of investors who purchased claims against the Caldwell estate. If you're alive, then you're the rightful heir to the Morrison fortune. And if you're the rightful heir, then those claims are worthless. Iron Wolf began to understand the trap they were walking into. So, you want to prove she's alive to protect your investments? Exactly. But I'm not interested in exposing her to the authorities. What I'm interested in is a business arrangement that benefits everyone involved. Well, what kind of arrangement? Little Star asked. Simple. You sign papers acknowledging that you're Elizabeth Morrison's daughter and the rightful heir to her estate. In exchange, you receive a controlling interest in the Morrison Railroad Trust, enough to make you one of the wealthiest women in America. My clients get their money back, you get your inheritance, and everyone goes home happy. The offer was staggering in its scope. Little Star would not only regain her inheritance, but would acquire control of assets worth far more than the original $30 million. She would have the resources to protect her people and build the kind of future she had always dreamed of. But Iron Wolf could see the poison hidden in the honey. What about the tribal status? He asked. The territorial recognition. Webb's smile was cold as winter wind. Oh, that was just a way to get your attention. Once Miss Morrison claims her inheritance, she'll be far too busy managing her business interests to worry about playing Indian in some remote valley. The insult sent a wave of anger through the watching tribe, but Little Star remained calm. And if I refuse, then I'm afraid I'll have to report your location to the federal authorities. You're still wanted for questioning in connection with Major Caldwell's death, and there are outstanding warrants for the arrest of several tribal members on charges of murder and theft. The threat was clear. Sign the papers and abandon her people, or face the destruction of everything they had built over the past 5 years. I need time to consider your offer, Little Star said finally. Of course, but not too much time. My clients are impatient men, and they have other ways of getting what they want. As Webb and his associates left the council lodge, Iron Wolf felt the familiar chill of approaching battle. But this time, the enemy wasn't coming with guns and cavalry sabers. They were coming with lawyers and legal papers, weapons that could destroy the tribe just as effectively as bullets. What are you thinking? He asked Little Star as they watched the traders disappear into the forest. I'm thinking that some battles can't be won by fighting. She replied, her storm-colored eyes reflecting a wisdom that seemed far older than her 13 years. Sometimes the only way to win is to change the rules of the game. What do you mean? Little Star smiled, and Iron Wolf caught a glimpse of the 8-year-old girl who had once challenged a grown man to single combat on a narrow ledge above certain death. I mean, it's time to remind the world that the daughter of Running Bear and Elizabeth Morrison didn't survive this long by accepting other people's choices for her life. The final battle for Little Star's freedom was about to begin. And this time, the weapons would be words, laws, and the unshakable will of a young woman who had learned that the most powerful victories came not from defeating your enemies, but from transforming them into allies. The legal battle that followed was unlike anything the American West had ever seen. Little Star's decision to fight the Railroad Trust in court rather than accept their ultimatum created a sensation that drew attention from newspapers across the country. The story had everything that captured the public imagination: a mysterious heiress who had been presumed dead, a hidden Native American community that had thrived in isolation, and a David versus Goliath struggle between a teenage girl and some of the most powerful men in America. But Little Star's strategy went deeper than mere publicity. Working with a team of lawyers who specialized in Indian rights, she filed a series of lawsuits that challenged not just the railroad trust's claims, but the entire legal framework that had been used to steal Native American lands for decades. "The beauty of it," explained Jonathan Hartwell, the Boston attorney who had traveled west to represent her, "is that she's not just claiming her inheritance as Elizabeth Morrison's daughter. She's claiming it as a member of the Lakota Nation, which gives her standing under both American and tribal law." Iron Wolf watched the proceedings with a mixture of admiration and concern. Little Star had indeed changed the rules of the game, but she was also risking everything on a legal strategy that had never been tested in court. "What if we lose?" Thunderhawk asked during one of their strategy sessions. "Then we lose everything," Little Star replied with characteristic honesty. "But if we win, we change the law for every Native American in the country. We establish precedents that will protect our people for generations to come." The case that emerged from their legal filings was complex enough to tie up the courts for years. Little Star was simultaneously claiming her inheritance as a white woman and defending her right to remain with her adopted tribe as a Native American. The contradiction was intentional. It forced the courts to confront the arbitrary nature of racial classifications and the injustices built into the legal system. Public opinion began to shift in their favor as the details of their story became known. Newspaper editorials condemned the railroad trust's attempt to steal a young woman's inheritance, and politicians began to distance themselves from the more egregious aspects of federal Indian policy. But the real breakthrough came when Little Star made a decision that surprised even her own lawyers. "I want to testify in person," she announced during a planning meeting. "Not just through depositions, but in open court in front of the judges and the public." "That's extremely risky," Hartwell warned. "The opposing counsel will try to discredit you to make you look like an ignorant savage who doesn't understand the complexities of the case." "Let them try," Little Star replied. "I've been underestimated before. It usually works out in my favor." The courtroom in Denver was packed when Little Star took the witness stand. At 13, she looked impossibly young to be at the center of such a momentous case. But when she began to speak, her voice carried the authority of someone who had earned her wisdom through suffering rather than study. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the chief judge directly, "I stand before you today, not as Elizabeth Morrison's daughter or as a member of the Lakota Nation, but as an American citizen claiming the rights that belong to all Americans." The statement sent a murmur through the courtroom. By claiming American citizenship while maintaining her tribal identity, Little Star was challenging the legal fiction that Native Americans were somehow separate from and inferior to other Americans. "The railroad trust claims that I fraudulently allowed them to believe I was dead in order to steal my own inheritance," she continued. "But I ask you to consider this. What kind of legal system allows a child's inheritance to be stolen simply because that child chooses to live with the people who love and protect her?" Over the course of 3 days, Little Star told her story with a combination of eloquence and raw emotional power that left few dry eyes in the courtroom. She spoke of her parents' love that transcended racial boundaries, of the violence that had taken them from her, of the tribe that had risked everything to keep her safe. But she also spoke of larger issues, the systemic injustices that had made her case possible. The need for laws that protected all Americans, regardless of their race or background, and the vision of a country where diversity was seen as strength rather than weakness. "I don't want my inheritance because I'm greedy," she concluded. "I want it because it represents something more important than money. It represents the right of every American to choose their own path, to define their own identity, to live according to their own values rather than the prejudices of others." The judge's decision, when it came 6 months later, was a landmark ruling that established new precedents for Native American rights and individual liberty. Little Star was awarded not only her full inheritance, but also punitive damages for the years of legal harassment she had endured. More importantly, the court ruled that Native Americans could not be forced to choose between their tribal identity and their American citizenship, a decision that would protect the rights of indigenous peoples for generations to come. But for Iron Wolf, the real victory was simpler and more personal. As he watched Little Star sign the papers that would make her one of the richest women in America, he saw not a wealthy heiress, but the frightened child he had rescued from a burning homestead 5 years ago. "What will you do with all that money?" he asked as they walked back to their hotel after the final court session. "But build something lasting," she replied without hesitation. "Schools, hospitals, legal aid centers, places where our people can get the education and support they need to thrive in both worlds. And the valley our home." Little Star smiled, and in that expression, Iron Wolf could see the woman she was becoming strong-wise and committed to using her power for the benefit of others. "The valley will always be our home," she said. "But now we have the resources to make it something more. A place where Native Americans from all tribes can come to heal, to learn to prepare for the future." As they rode the train back to their hidden sanctuary, Iron Wolf reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The orphaned daughter of a man once accused of betraying his tribe had become the architect of a new future for her people. The eagle feather that Little Star still carried in her medicine bundle had indeed flown where the wind willed it, carrying them through trials that would have broken lesser souls. And now, as they returned to the valley where their new life had begun, Iron Wolf knew that their greatest adventures still lay ahead. The war for Little Star's life had ended. The work of building a better world was just beginning. 2 years later, Iron Wolf stood on the ridge overlooking the valley and marveled at what they had accomplished. The Morrison Educational Center had attracted students from across the country, both Native American and white, who came to learn in an environment that celebrated rather than suppressed cultural diversity. The legal clinic had won dozens of cases that expanded Native American rights and protections. The medical center had saved countless lives by combining traditional healing with modern medicine. Most importantly, the valley had become a symbol of hope, proof that different peoples could work together to create something better than what either could achieve alone. Little Star, now 15, and acknowledged as one of the most influential young leaders in America, stood beside him, watching the sun set over their achievements. "Do you ever regret the choices we made?" she asked, echoing a conversation they had shared years before. Iron Wolf looked at the thriving community below, at the children playing without fear, at the adults working together toward common goals, and felt his heart swell with pride. "Never," he said simply. "We built bridges when the world wanted walls. We chose hope when others chose hatred. We proved that mercy is stronger than vengeance, and that love is more powerful than fear." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Little Star raised the sacred eagle feather that had carried them through so many trials. A golden eagle circled overhead, its cry echoing off the valley walls like a benediction. "The ancestors are pleased," she said softly. "We have honored their memory and secured our people's future." Iron Wolf nodded, feeling the deep satisfaction of a man who had lived to see his greatest hopes realized. The frightened child he had rescued had become exactly what her father had dreamed, a bridge between worlds. A leader who could unite rather than divide, a symbol of what America could become when it lived up to its highest ideals. The story was complete, the circle closed, and the future bright with possibility. The orphaned daughter had found her destiny, and in doing so had shown the world that vengeance could be transformed into mercy, and mercy into justice. In the years that followed, the Morrison Valley became a model for Native American self-governance and cultural preservation. Little Star served as its elected leader until she was old enough to take her place on the national stage, eventually becoming the first Native American woman elected to the United States Senate. Iron Wolf lived to see his 100th birthday, spending his final years as the Valley's most respected elder and keeper of traditional wisdom. He died peacefully, surrounded by children and grandchildren, who carried forward the lessons he had taught about courage, compassion, and the power of choosing hope over hatred. The sacred eagle feather was eventually placed in the Valley's cultural center, where it served as a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of mercy can change the world. But its true legacy lived on in the thousands of lives that had been touched by the bridge between worlds that Little Star had built with nothing more than determination and an unshakable belief in the power of human decency. The war for Little Star's life had become a victory for all who believed that America's promise of liberty and justice could indeed be for all.